My intention is to say a few things tonight about some slightly different views having to do with consciousness and ultimately having to do with the great world of human emotion and the flow of energy and the flow of information, new and otherwise. In the beginning, let me point out that if everyone's system could continually remember that it's all alive and growing, then everything I've ever said would begin to fall into line. All of the Heisenberg and the anti-Heisenberg particles would be in some way instantly communicating. It would render all three-dimensionally conceived facts, opinions, much less conclusions, moot, cubed. If anybody that had this kind of supreme interest in life, if they could continually remember that it's all alive and growing, just that. From one view, all of our life can be seen as information as energy and man as form. Within the context of it all being alive, you can begin to see information as energy all the way from, in our case, in the 3D verbal presentation of it, an update mapping of it. You see information as energy all the way from what would appear to be our cellular level all the way to the cosmic level. That is information flowing, and it is not self-destructive information. Even though within each person's partnership there seems to be some degree of that which could be labeled self-destructive. Within the conflicts that seem to go on within each person of I should quit eating so much, smoking so much, drinking so much, laying around so much, and yet then you continue to do the things that seem to be not in your best interest. Then one could conclude that we all have some form of self-destruction in us. And I guess that has been concluded by some Western psychologists. But I point out to you that one cell is not the entire body any more than one au revoir is get lost mother. And when you rise above the absolute cellular level, there is no self-destruction going on in life. The information being passed is not taken as a whole self-destructive. It is the way in which the nervous system responds that are based upon that is why I've asked you questions in the past and sketched you out new areas of maps talking about hillbilly music, sad poetry, pointing out that all news is bad news, and pointing out that those emotions that seem to be of any consequence to a human are always those that seem to be negative. In the beginning, this can sound to be as though it is some kind of psychological commentary, that we're all brought up under some kind of bad conditions, that we're all babies and we're all whining, and that's not it. Because as always, we're talking about a biochemical reaction. We're talking about us being an alive nervous system within another nervous system. A vivus machina within a vivus machina, on and on and on. The information that is going on is not self-destructive, or you would have blown up. Humanity would have blown up. I could make the aggression go a little better. Some parts of your body would have blown up. Your brain would have blown up, then you would have blown up, then Buckhead would have blown up, the South Bronx would have blown up, Tarzana would have blown up, Coconut Grove would have blown up, then Florida would have blown up, then New York would blow up, then California would blow up, then all of Georgia, then the United States would blow up. Then the North American continent would blow up, then the Western Hemisphere would blow up. I think you get the idea. There are those cases, as you note, or you should note, that people do seem to have blown up in some way, that the message, at least on their cellular level, seems to be self-destructive. We lock them up. People commit suicide. People say they're going to commit suicide. People attempt to commit suicide. People sit around and cut themselves with glass. People sit around and take objects, chemicals that seem to do them harm. And then the larger part of humanity, some section there within Tarzana or the Bronx, right and beat seems they get together and say, well, let's lock this person up until they get better. But you have got to see again that whole sections, whole states, whole communities do not blow themselves up. The information that is being transported within your nervous system, within your community's nervous system, within life's nervous system, is not one of self-destruction. The information is, given a 3D choice, the information is positive. But you've got to remember that somebody's got to dance backwards, that life will try anything once, that even when you cook good food, it's going to rot and stink, that there's always a landfill even behind the Ritz-Carlton. But the information taken as a whole, it should be obvious by now. By any time frame capable of being perceived by an ordinary intellect, by any scope of space, our local side of the universe is not in a mode of self-destruct. Now, within the view of information being energy and man being form, let me point out specifically that ultimately the only valuable personal information is that apparently is original to your own ears and your own consciousness. Please underline in your memory the word ultimately. This is tied in. This is another corner to the block that I've thrown around many times of asking you why it seems that only externally fueled axioms, proverbs, words of wisdom seem to have any sutience to man. That if you did not hear it from somebody else, if you didn't read it, how important can it be? Even if it was on a bathroom wall. You are then faced, if you're following my update sketch tonight, you would be faced with several questions. And that would be, where does new information come from? That apparently, let us say for one instance, that you get some new information when times are right, here when we meet, that I say something and it sounds as though this is new information. And I can ask you where did it come from, and you say, well, it came from you. Or you could say, well, I got some new information. I was reading up on chemistry, some things I didn't know. I was reading in the New York Times science section something new about astronomy. And so I got new information. And the source was the newspaper. The source was a textbook. But I'm telling you that ultimately, I'm talking to a few people now. We're not talking to humanity. Because humanity is within another Vivus grid system, different level. But with you people, ultimately, the only valuable personal information is that is apparently original to you, that it seemed to arise within you. You seem to have heard it from you. You seem to have become conscious of it from you, not from me and not from anybody else. How can that be? Where then is the source of new information? Where did you get it? How is information produced? How is new information produced? Without giving you necessarily any apparent answer, let me give you some saddle spurs. Let me ask you this. Remember now we're supposedly confronting this musical question for the time being of from whence cometh new information? How is it produced? Where does it come from? Then let me ask you sub-questions under that. In considering possibilities of the source of new information, would we be more likely to imagine that new information comes from the actions, the experience of man, either others or yourself, or does it come from the thinking of action of others, that is, theories, or your own theories? Now, if you're following this update, this temporary new map overlay, you have got to admit, as always, that there are those two possibilities when you're dealing with humans. That what's going on is either based on, a part of, arising from either action or thinking of action. Every other 3D creature is limited to action. and one way that we can distinguish man at this level is to say that he is capable of thinking of action, not just action. So we've got those two possibilities. So keep bringing those into this update and trying to consider the question as to where might new information come from. I ask you again, would it very likely or most likely come from the actions of either you or other people? That would be their experience, what's already happened. They move through time and space, and they, as it's called in ordinary parlance, they learn from their experience. Or did it come about, does it come about, either from you or from others, from theories, that is, from thinking of action? I ask you further, is it possible that there is a information factory? Is there somewhere in life's own genetic code itself, it's like a satellite factory? Could it be that there is an expansion, a stretching of life's own helix that spews out new information as it's stretched? Because anytime you stretch anything in the 3D world, the tension causes, in the 3D world, we're talking about cause and effect, of course, but it causes more than the visible, measurable tension on the thing itself or the process. It has the ripple effect. The tension immediately affects the neighboring areas. So this kind of stretching in the expansion of life's own genetic code, could this be where there is a spewing out, a leaking out, a dribbling out even, of new information? Now, you got to admit it comes from somewhere. Nobody is wired up to think about this or to question it. If there's new information, somebody says, aren't you interested in blank, biology, chemistry, and you say, yeah, and they say, well, you should read an article in yesterday's paper. You should read such and such book. And you naturally assume, if it seemed to be worthwhile, that the new information came from the book, from the newspaper. Then if I wanted to push it further and say, well, that's not the source, where'd it come from? Then you'd look back, either at the paper or your memory, and say, well, it came from Professor so-and-so, Dr. so-and-so. Well, where did he get it? Well, he got it through his research, right? Through his experience, right? His actions. Well, if you're going to use my kind of sketching, you'd have to say, well, I guess it would be a combination of his experience and his theories. All right. How did he come up with the idea to try these experiments? That he took these actions? Where did he come up with the basis of trying to calculate, to propose a theorem to fit what he was proposing to experiment with? How was he going to think about his actions vis-a-vis the actions that he was planning? Well, I know he said that he was reading some experiments from Dr. Matz and Dr. Funero from the 1920s, and he was trying to update them. And so there you go, right? Well, where did they get it? It is both that complex in the 3D world as always, because you're dealing with a finite loop that is not finite, and the mind gives out. But that should be a proper area for you to consider as, where does new information come from? And it does not come from Dr. Matz. And it does not come from the New York Times. But by God, it's got to come from somewhere, right? Where? How is new information produced? I'm going to drag in a few little things from the last few weeks. You remember what I was talking about in the external world, even though this is still emblematical, those that seem to be in control, those that would seem to be in some way fitted into life scheme at some particular time and place, that they are in control, that they are dominant over some less powerful group. Those that would be controllers, those that would be in temporary power, remember that, beard power. One of the ways that they deal, apparently, if there was a conspiratorial plot going on, the one area that I've already mentioned some weeks back, was that they would be dealing, this would be one of their it almost came back to me. A decade. What's the Italian word for a beautiful stroke? Oh well. One of the ways that they would handle this, I was proposing to you, was those that would be in control, they would give those that they were going to control the illusion, the belief that they were receiving a plurality of views, not just some view. And when it's operating at the most efficient, it would not be some apparent government that with no apparent sleight of hand would say, all right, all the news you're getting is coming from us. I'm the head guy. I pass everything that comes out in this one paper. We own the paper. The government owns it. Whatever we tell you is true. That is not the most efficient. Never. The most efficient is to give those that you're going to control, those that you're going to dominate, is to give them the sensation, the absolute belief that there is a plurality of views possible, and that they're hearing them, they're exposed to them. And some weeks back I tried to get you to see, at least by me questioning it, that that is truly an illusion. That's an illusion emblematically, and that is an illusion in the 3D world. But that would be one of the ways to hang on to control, would be to give those that you're attempting, those that you are controlling, the belief that there is a plurality of views possible. Now, can you take that internally down to a cellular level within you, not within a community, not within a nation, and see that this is the way your own neurogenetic consciousness misleads you? This is one of the, if there was such a thing, this would be one of the power plays. This would be one of the secret weapons of dirty old individual, mechanical, traumatized consciousness. This would be your old sorry, individual, mechanically produced sense of I. This would be everyone's old carnal self. This would be everyone's old sinful mind. This would be the ultimate in the partnership, because what does it do? What does it do in all reasonably, horizontally sane people? Internally, in you, is the belief that within you, forget out there in the newspapers and the three so-called network news organizations, within you seems to be the availability of a plurality of views. It seems to be obvious, because on many, many subjects, you go, yeah, but then on the other hand, no. Well, I might do this, but what if I got caught? I might do this if I had a few drinks, and I wouldn't do that. That there's obviously a plurality of views within me. Really? Well, sure, it's obvious. Really? And you people have the nerve in your most horizontal moments to sit and snigger at the poor people in Albania, Russia, that put up with some foolish tyrant telling them that black is white, up is down, that oranges are apples. Puh. Thank God for who you are, right? Were it not for the ability to have a kind of internal, personal, political freedom, a plurality possible of views and opinions, even though at times I may seem to pay a certain price, it's worth it. Freedom has its price. blah, blah, blah. You cannot see that if there was some kind of, remember this is all allegorical, but if there was some sort of great hidden conspiracy, and taking it now down from a tribal level down to your cellular level, your individual level, what better way than to take this heretofore externally proclaimed and used idea that I said of those that would be in control. The most efficient way is to take those that you're going to attempt to control and make them believe that there is a freedom there, a kind of, and forget now about some sort of physical freedom. The first one is to make them believe that there is a multiplicity of views and opinions floating around as possible. I'm not going to interfere with it, not me. Just because I'm in control, it's good for you people, or we want you to have it. What better way? It'd be like the Hormel, the Oscar Mayer company, making pigs believe that they can fly anytime they want to. Taking that external, politicized idea, can you see that internally, if there was a plot to keep each individually on his own molecular, cellular level, both captive and both happy, satisfied to be captive, while believing that there is a plurality of views and opinions freely flowing to me, through me, and I can react accordingly? That does not sound familiar to you? And don't worry about Chairman Mao and Stalin. Worry about you. Does that not sound familiar inside? That is the nature of ordinary neurogenetic consciousness. And at the same time, men are led to believe that there is some necessity to overcome this kind of plurality, but at least it shows that we have some freedom. We have freedom in the beginning, we have some kind of freedom of will. It's up to us to do something with it. Another aspect of this, jumping back and forth from what's taken externally as being some kind of interesting theory, if not fact, these conspiratorial ideas, then almost without exception, all of these theories speak of some dastardly, one-worldly plot behind it all. That all these people, whoever they are, that the conspiracy is always based upon a one-world idea. The UN. I guess that's one of the more common or more recent popular ones. It's a plot, some kind of hungry, power-mad bankers, and somebody invented the UN. They're going to get us all in it and do away with nationalistic boundaries and do away with our governments. We'll all be one-worlders. It's what they're after. Politically, religiously, economically, and it's a plot. A dastardly plot. Well, be that as it may, can you not realize that life itself is pursuing such a course? That you can see, of course I say see, you can begin to feel it in your own genes, in your own nervous system, that life itself has always and continues to strive toward a kind of non-regional, non-fractional state. On an individual level, the whole concept historically, and you should be able to feel this, by all means, you people, the idea of individual men trying to reach some state of enlightenment, some state of evolution in their own lifetime. What is it? It is pursuing that same kind of one world course. They even have used terms in these would-be metaphysical systems throughout the ages that the attempt that or the aim of our attempts and our rituals is to stabilize the individual into a permanent one, to in some way uncover a stable, solid core within each of us, a one-worlder, to do away with regionalism, jingoism, that I would be like a one-world government, no boundaries, no Mexico, no Costa Rica, no United States, no Canada, no Catholics, no Jews. I would be the ultimates, the individual ultimate of these grand conspiratorial theories, these dastardly theories. And they do sound dastardly. They sound dastardly to the many. Because the many, the large part of life's body as reflected in humanity, is still fighting the territorial wars. The genes within life's body is still being stretched and punched to fight for territory and position. Wars, hostility, just generally pissed off at your neighbor. But it is striving continually toward this kind of one world condition. And the few should be able to feel this by all means. And yet from an external view, it sounds condemnable, because it sounds as though that would be, truly, if there was such worldwide conspiratorial plots, that this would be part of it. To do away with our individuality, do away with our nationalism, our regionalism, our religious differences, and turn us all into some kind of 1984 robots, this group of secret old men hiding behind the fiction of Big Brother, big government. Then, by God, they'd have us in their clutches. Of course, the many never realize that. They never turn around and say, well, whose clutches am I in now? But never mind all that. But humans, I said that the few should immediately be able to hear me pointing out that the whole ordinary idea of seeking enlightenment, some higher state of consciousness, etc., could be seen as an attempt to become a one-worlder, no matter how you describe it. But you can also see, to a lesser degree, that the many, being tied in, being a living part of life's own living parts, that the many are tied in trying to become one-worlders. That is what life is striving for. Fads, fashion, the joining up of organizations, of groups. You can certainly make psychological comments, so-called psychological analysis of why do some people join up with groups? Why do some people always want the latest haircut, the latest fashion? You can blame it on sexual insecurity. You can blame it on childhood traumas, and etc. But like everything else that you can't remember, it is a molecular reality. It is the percolation and the moving of biochemical electrical energy. That's what it is. But a part of the reality of life striving to become a one-worlder is the individuals striving while still claiming that they are interested in being individuals, that they are striving in a low-level sense, that is, the many people. They're being driven to try and gradually, slowly erase the differences. The closest, I might point out parenthetically, from one view, the closest that you would have to an ordinary person out in the 3D world, of there actually being a true pluralist. In the 3D world would be those that are judged, defined to be with multiple personalities. There you would have a true pluralist. And what do we do with them? We lock them up. But there would be, in the 3D world, a true pluralist. That you ask them one time, what do they think about so-and-so? And according to all these reports, people that have 10, 12, 20 different, quote, personalities, you can ask them one time, and they say, well, I'm very in favor of that. In fact, I may pursue that as a living. They reach down and light a cigarette, and you ask them again, and suddenly they're speaking in another voice, a different sexual voice. They're ready to fight about it. Now, that would be a pluralist. In a sense, that would be a 3D freedom fighter. That would be the epitome of what ordinary consciousness says we should be about. But as soon as you realize it in the 3D world, what do? It's quick. Call the wagon and lock this person up. Something is wrong. And what's wrong? There would be, in the 3D world, a true pluralist. You would have somebody in the 3D world encroaching on the land of freedom that Thomas Jefferson never dreamed of. That they're free at least beyond a partnership. Let us say that they're free at least times 10 compared to you. That about anything you ask them, they've got at least 10 different, widely varying opinions and reactions to it. And they all live together. By all these psychological reports, all these psychiatric case studies. If we were at all speaking psychologically, let me steal something else from the wonderful world of psychology. All of you should remember similar studies that you read even in your undergraduate days. It's been a fairly common one for the last 2 or 3 decades. And that is, they will take a group of students, any group of people, and they will take them outside. Let's use psychology students. And they'll take them outside and say, we want all you people to observe what's going to take place, and we're going to have a little test. And the professor will take the students outside or into an auditorium or something, and then a staged, a prepared event will occur. Somebody will run through and they'll shout out something. Somebody will leap up with a knife or a gun, and one person with shades will run out, and there'll be some kind of conversation. Somebody will get knocked down. Somebody will raise a flag. Somebody will shake out a banner. One guy will empty his pockets. A woman will run out and pull her knickers down, and she'll leave, and that'll be the end of it. Then the professor will call anybody up, and he'll say, tell me everything you can remember that went on. And the person, the man or woman, boy or girl, will do their best. And they'll relate everything they can think of. They'll give them additional time. And the person will think and think until finally the professor says, all right, do you believe that's everything you can remember? Everything. The color of the clothes people are wearing, everything. The person will finally say yes. No matter how many things the person remembers. In fact, once or twice I read, somebody even came up with a mathematical formula, which I don't remember now, that they swore by. That whatever it is, no matter how astute the person was, if the professor starts out and selects one person and says, now you're going to be in charge, you are the one I'm going to call on. I want everybody else to observe now. I want you to observe too, but you're the one that I'm going to call on to tell me everything you can remember that's going to happen in the next 2 minutes that we plan. And so a person can be prepared. You know, concentrate, get ready, clear your mind. This person, no matter how many things they remember, no matter how long they have, the person say, all right, that's it. I can't remember anything else. All right, take that number, whatever it is, X, and then turn to the other students, the other people who observed it, and they will always remember, it seemed like it was something like 2.5 more things than that one person did. Whatever it is, they'll always remember a lot more than any one person. Sure, all of you remember some form of that. It's been around for years. As always, if it's good enough for the 3D world, it's good enough for me. If I brought up an example, it's obviously good enough for me. So let's accept that as a given 3D fact, as far as facts go in the social sciences, that many people, several people, will always see more of any event than any one person ever will. Let's just accept that as a fact. Dealing with the nervous system, as psychology would call it, well, they'd call it consciousness, I guess, but that it goes through each person individually through some kind of process of selection, rejection, indifference to what was going on verbally, visually, maybe within the demonstration that some aroma was turned loose. But still they would say that each person's consciousness, each person's awareness has some kind of filtering system. That some of the things that the first person that they asked to come up with all the things they could remember, that some of them just didn't register. Or some of them, apparently this person just rejected. Because let's say that out of a class of 50 people, as soon as this one person got through, all 49 pointed out one thing that just seemed to be obvious to all of them, and he went, no, what? And it was almost as though in some way he had a built-in censor. Maybe it was something about the woman that came out dropping her knickers. And that everybody in the class went, the woman came out and put her pants down. And he went, geez, I didn't notice that. And the 49 look at each other and him, and the professor would make some mental note, and probably the students like, Well, obviously this person has a sexual dysfunction somewhere in their traumatized childhood. So there would seem to be, if we were speaking psychologically, some kind of process of a rejection, a self-censorship. That each person's consciousness seems to be a series of filters, seems to be a series of acceptors, rejectors, and then areas that seem to be indifferent to certain of the impressions and things that went on. Internally, and of course now forgetting all that psychological claptrap, forgetting that you at one time were living in kindergarten. Can you see the use, the validity of that within yourself to make your own nervous system, to make the neurogenetic reality of your own partnership, make yourself fully aware of everything that internally you seem to go through the same kind of process with, to wit, there is a continual process of registering what's going on, rejecting some of what's going on, and indifference to some of what's going on. Whereas if you could look upon all that seems to be the molecular, the neural and muscular activity within you, if you looked on as a group of people rather than taking one person's observation, which is all you're ever doing if you're ordinary, it's either you or what appears to be your partner, which becomes irrelevant once you begin to see it. You just think it's relevant now, if you're still ordinary at all. But you only take one view. You only take this one observer about, all right, what just happened? You ask you, and you says, well, that person looked at us when we said, don't you have any cold tomato juice? That person looked at me like I was an idiot. I saw it. Didn't you see it? Yeah, I saw it. Did anything else go on it then? Well, yeah, I think there was somebody standing back there, back at the beer coolers, and I think I heard somebody laugh. And if I did, there's no doubt they're laughing at me. Well, what else was going on there in the store? Well, I don't know. You know more than you know. There is a class of people within you. There is a process. It is not psychological. Forget all that by now. There's no reason for it. There's no personal reason for it. If you're so important that the gods and the cosmic forces made personal reasons for you to hear certain things and not hear certain things, and notice certain and certain other things, you're way too important to be fucking around with the likes of me anyway, if you're that important. It is a molecular arrangement. It is that there is a different flow of information going through you and the person next to you. It's slightly different between me and you, between me and somebody else, between you and somebody else, between you and everybody else. Some people are seeing some things in one situation, some are seeing other things. Some are hearing some things, some are hearing other things. But within you, you have the ability continually to expand on what you have observed. You know more than you know you know. It's not a psychological trick, it's not some kind of Sufi trick, it's not a spiritual trick. It is a molecular reality. Impressions were made in your neural system. They're there in the nervous system, but by and large, you would, if you're taking any more of my terminology, you would classify them as either being so D, that is so negative to you personally, you just kind of rejected them, or else they fall within that great, grand, vague category of E, that, well, I guess maybe I did notice other things when that guy kind of laughed at me asking about the cold tomato juice. If I think real hard, it seemed like, I mean, if you're talking about minor shit, I think there was a fat woman in a red dress standing over here next to me, I think. But you know, what the hell does that matter? It's irrelevant. If it's going on in a life's body, it's not irrelevant. A fat woman in a red dress standing next to you, it's irrelevant to you. It ain't irrelevant to her. And it sure as hell is not irrelevant to life. Except ordinary consciousness finds what? The only thing that's not irrelevant, by and large, continuously, is what? Why? Of course, a sure-footed knowledge of that is what makes everybody the mental giants they are. To quote the great world, out there again, to go from the soft sciences, the cream puffs of psychology, into the good old hard sciences, there's one that I have read and heard many times. I never heard it, I read it. Of scientists, or it being said of them, that scientists must be absolutely free to question absolutely everything with no conditions, restrictions, or restraints. I'd like to point out, for the few, you got to go way beyond that. Because in the 3D world wherein live so-called scientists, they see limits. They see limits in the very description of saying there can be no limits. There has to be a defining territory to that, to be able to speak of no limits, to be able to speak of no restrictions. You've got to be able to define restrictions. You've got to be operating on the 3D basis of a binary consideration of everything that's going on. And the third part, of course, being the irrelevant. But if you're going to properly study anything, if you're going to be truly a clinical scientist in this, if you're going to indeed in some way try to become consciousness itself, studying consciousness, you've got to go beyond that kind of description of saying. Of course, I was exaggerating. I started off with a general quote that I remember I'd read about scientists must be free to, etc. You do understand I kind of hyped it up a bit by saying scientists must be absolutely free to absolutely question absolutely everything with absolutely no conditions, absolutely no restrictions, and no restraints. I mean, that seems to be hyperbole enough. And yet, to get anywhere, you got to be able to go beyond that. New information, the kind to facilitate what this is about, what it's supposed to be about, what it could be about, what it might be about in your particular case, your individual case. It's got to be a matter of a certain kind of new information, and the new information cannot be limited to even the apparently objective sounding statement that I gave you twice about scientists must be absolutely free to question absolutely everything with absolutely no conditions, etc., etc. New information cannot even come about on the basis of that, because the new information always comes about through some way that the thinking of action has affected the action. The theories are going to affect the experiment. And if that's not the case, which sometimes it's not, then the damn experiment affects the theories of the experiment. You didn't like that? All right, the scientist, every laboratory's got 2 doors all the way Los Alamos to wherever the biggest accelerator is now over in Switzerland. Every laboratory, this is a scientific fact, I don't know whether you people know this, but I'll tell you this, because it has some importance. Every laboratory, I'm talking about a laboratory where there's a real scientist. I ain't talking about some kind of Kmart scientist. A real scientist, every laboratory has 2 doors. And so every real scientist can go through one door and come out another door. You've got to remember that. If those kind of conditions are not extant, you're not dealing with a real scientist. I mean, you may be dealing with somebody like Tiny Tim or Pee Wee Herman calling himself a scientist. But new information cannot come on that basis. And it cannot come from a place wherein there are 2 doors. Only 2. And one aspect of this kind of new information, I gave a passing blow to some months back, but let me point out that the kind of new information that is needed for this is always in the form of, or it's always on the basis of a kind of insult. It has got to be a form of insult to previous information. If it's not, it is not the kind of new information that people here need. If any of you can quickly bite on that, catch it and bite it good on the ass, you understand why there's no such thing, as I tried to tell you originally. As far as this is concerned, there's no such thing as ancient knowledge. If there was knowledge somewhere, 5000 BC, 1250 AD, 50 years ago, if there was knowledge somewhere that seemed to liberate, that seemed to excite new circuits in some group of people, so what? It does not mean anything now. That's why it's safe to talk about. That's why it's safe to write about. That's why you can buy a book about it. That's why there'll be some followers. That's why there'll be some, one or more living, expert, masters, students of this ancient philosophy, even if it's only 50 years old. Because it's no longer insulting. People may believe they find dead bodies offensive and odious, but a dead body cannot really be insulting. And a dead body of so-called information cannot be insulting. If it is still insulting to some large group of people, then you've got somewhat of an anomaly. I'm not going into it, but sometimes bodies are not as dead as you might think they are. I mean, I don't want to scare you, but sometimes dead bodies are not all that dead. But by and large, dead bodies are dead. If people say they're dead, you can depend on them being dead. And one way to test it, as I was going to say, is the body is no longer insulting. The body of information is not insulting. When you discover it, it's not insulting. When you discover it, it's more on the basis of, oh, gee, this is what I've been looking for. I've been reading books and going to occult and mystical lectures for 20 years, and now I found it. I feel so good. It was like I opened this book, and by the time I read a few pages, it was like some old friend, even an old friend I'd never met, but an old friend sort of reached out of the pages and said, "Welcome home, Bunky." Now, I know that everybody's been through some of that, and some of you may think that you went through some of that with me, that, oh, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. But there's another level on which you're going to finally confront, still dealing with 3D reality, the appearance of it, that the new information that seems to arise in you, that I said that you must ultimately have, that must ultimately be the apparent source of your new information is you. You're going to discover that, given other modes of comparison, my description of it being insulting, it ain't bad. That this is insulting. This insults everything my parents told me. It insults everything that I believe the Pope said, the world's most learned rabbis. This is insulting. If Buddha was here, he'd take this person, I'm sure. I know I do in his behalf. And of course, the coup de grace is, I find this personally insulting to everything I had believed up until now. That is, remember, if it's real good knowledge, a first-class 3D observer should think to himself or herself, if this be true, I'm a goner. That is new. That's new information. It is insulting. It is insulting to discover, just like I told all of you originally, that everything you know is wrong. That's insulting. You mean it took me blank years? I shouldn't say blank. Let's face up to facts with some of you people. It took me 30 years, 40 years to realize that everything I knew up until now was wrong. That's pretty insulting. Maybe just some of what I knew. You are not truly free then to question. So you've got restrictions, you've got conditions. You don't understand the true value, the true necessity of insulting information. You don't want new information. You want to be comforted. You're wired up that you want your molecular structure to be stroked. You want vibrations coming in visually. It's one of the easiest ways to read a book. Philosophy X from Yogi 21974, and he says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, the secret truth and information is," and you begin to read it, and your heart flutters. Your eyes begin to water. You feel a warmth all over because it's just what, I just knew it was true. I just knew this was it, and here is validation. That is not new information. That is not new information to you. Not only because it had an apparently external source, but also because it was not insulting. Now, in the beginning, not everything's insulting. I'll grant you that. Even what may prove to ultimately be your source of new information, your apparent external source. It may not be insulting, but it's going to come that you have to see. You have to be able to face up to the reality that this is becoming insulting. That if what I just heard, or what I just thought, what I believe he just said, if that's true, I should be pissed. And if I was still within my right mind after all this time of fooling around with this, I'd be mad. I would have taken that personally and been a bit ticked off. It just shows how far, he's broken down my psyche. I can listen to this kind of stuff. As insane as it is, it's potentially personally insulting, and I'll put up with it. I don't seem to take it as personally as I should. I'll worry about it later, perhaps. But it is ultimately insulting if it is new information. Even in the 3D world, is the way I threw this out in passing some weeks back to you people. Even in the 3D world, it does not appear, which of course is not operating at the same level of intensity, but all new information is eventually insulting to the previous information. All new theories are an insult to the previous theories. If they're accepted, if they're taken and finally accepted on a wide basis in the 3D world as being an enlargement, a proper restatement, an expansion of it, an overturning of it. In a sense, it is taking the previous theory, get stuffed, take a walk. You've been seen through. Newton, it's a good thing you're not here now. You'd be the laughing stock of Cambridge. You'd never win a prize. Would name a cookie after you at best. Another should be interesting aspect. It appears in the 3D world, and it can be otherwise, but let's start there. It appears that new information and what it seems to produce can be, quote, miraculous. This term has been used, thrown around, everybody's talked about it. People believe that they saw something that was miraculous, they heard something that was miraculous, they read about someone else who observed a miraculous occurrence. The great superconscious men and women have done miraculous things, that there must be information that you've heard about, that somebody found one time, and as soon as they heard the information, the secret word, read the book, a miraculous thing occurred to the person. But here's what has never been noted. The many call miraculous that which they don't understand, while the few do just the opposite. I keep trying to tell you, although it's not as simple as the words, is it? It's the obvious once you see it. And those that can see beyond the ordinary confines of their own, as life has turned us all out more or less, the limits of your own molecular structure, the operations of your own nervous system right now, that the truly miraculous is that which you understand. While everybody else is doing it in just the opposite way. The holdovers, the ancient part of your own nervous system, can of course relate to that. It can understand it, that which I don't understand ordinarily is miraculous. It's the only thing to call it. But if you can climb above that evolutionary level, it's just the opposite. The miraculous is that which you do understand. What's the sense in something being miraculous if you don't understand it? That means it's useless. Or at the very least, it's irrelevant. Yet, what attracts the nervous system? What do you print? What letters, what ink do you distribute around the spine of a book, on an ad for a book, to get into your rods and cones that says a book describing the miraculous journey of a modern-day mystic? A new book touching on the miraculous discoveries in contemporary particle physics. Everyone, as they say, I didn't coin this term, everyone loves a mystery, the miraculous. Well, I don't. I don't know why you should. Because what's miraculous is what you can understand that everybody else didn't. What's miraculous is what you can understand that at one time you did not understand. But note again, any of you who can still remember the first time original unveiling of Kairoot, about the nature that things could be in the 3D world, upside down and backwards. That ordinarily we're all wired up to say the miraculous is that which we don't understand, to be intrigued by, to be entertained by, to spend money on, to expend energy on the pursuit of, the confrontation of the so-called inexplicable, the mysteries, the miraculous. Wow, wow, wow. That's why the many are the many, and the few can't hardly get a bus out of town. Let's turn the tape. I love to point out these little, as I call them, tricks that life plays, but another one that's along these lines I've been wanting to point out to you for some time, and now by God's my chance. It's another one of life's low-level, dastardly, bravado tricks. That is, life is continually presenting bioinformation demand, and it seems to be based on the apparent freedom for man to ponder what is presented, to have a plurality of reactions possible, and then to react accordingly. When what is actually occurring is that what seems to be the matter in question has, in an unrecognized manner, already been forced upon him as a given. And he ends up individually and collectively believing that there is some matter, continually, some philosophical, some interesting question that has arisen through man's culture, his psychological growth, etc., etc. Now we're talking about the way ordinary people, 3D people, would think about it and write about it. It is a matter of energy. It is a matter of information flowing through the system that we call man. But it is continually presented in the matter that it seems to be open-ended questions. And it seems that those hearing it, that is, to wit you and other regular nervous systems, have a plurality of possible reactions to it available and can react accordingly after thinking about it, pondering it. But there's an unrecognized force at work that all this is moot, it's an illusion. Because within what appears to be the question, the problem presented, there is an unrecognized given that's already forced upon man, and he never sees it, no matter how intelligent he is. And it's not simply a grammatical or rhetorical trick. E.g., here's a this will cover many, many generations. Quote, do I, should we support a totally unregulated economy so long as the poorer, less powerful sectors are not unfairly abused? Unquote. Think about it. You're all reasonable, intelligent, humane men and women. You're all sophisticated enough to know some of the pros and cons of a free economy, supply side, a regulated economy. You can come to some reasonable conclusion. You can think about it. You've read pros and cons. You know that there's no such thing as a truly, absolutely free economy. You can see the need for some kind of restraint. You can see the need of the government spending some money that they've taken from us to help protect those who have less ability. So, it is a reasonable question, one that perhaps intelligent men and women might disagree on to some degree. But there's obviously the ability to choose, to think in different ways, to consider a plurality of options in response to this. I repeat the question. Do I, should we support a totally unregulated economy so long as the poorer, less powerful sectors are not unfairly abused? Unquote. Think about it. You're all reasonable, intelligent, humane men and women. You're all sophisticated enough to know some of the pros and cons of a free economy, supply side, a regulated economy. You can come to some reasonable conclusion. You can think about it. You've read pros and cons. You know that there's no such thing as a truly, absolutely free economy. You can see the need for some kind of restraint. You can see the need of the government spending some money that they've taken from us to help protect those who have less ability. So, it is a reasonable question, one that perhaps intelligent men and women might disagree on to some degree. But there's obviously the ability to choose, to think in different ways, to consider a plurality of options in response to this. I repeat the question. Do I, should we support a totally unregulated economy so long as the poorer, less powerful sectors are not unfairly abused or unfairly taken advantage of? That's no question. Now, that's just one. I guess I could stand here until we all got sick of it and begin to make them up on a religious basis, sexual basis, social basis, political basis. That it sounds as though it is a question, and it's the kinds of questions, and when I say I can make them up, I don't mean something that's only pertinent to some situation right now. The example I just sort of made up has been hanging around as long as man has been writing and remembering what he wrote. In other words, as long as you've had civilized groups of people. The powerful, asking everyone, should we be in favor of an almost unlimited use of power? Of course, so long as we don't take unfair advantage of those who don't have any power. And of course the answer, with varying degrees in there, you should already hear is, well, I can't find any fault with that. As long as we do not take unfair advantage of those that we're taking unfair advantage of. And you go, well, yeah, well, I can't disagree. It sounds fine with me. I mean, as long as you keep those key ideas in there that we do not unfairly take advantage of those that we're going to unfairly take advantage of, that you people are. I repeat, this is not a rhetorical trick. It is not a grammatical conspiratorial plot. But this does happen in the external world. It's going on all the time. It goes on in advertising. Remember, I'm going to have to tell you, it's no plot. You don't know what a fucking plot is. But it's going on in advertising. It goes on in political slogans. It goes on with parents dealing with their children. It goes on with children trying to deal with their parents, that you're continually, apparently, asking a question, trying to solicit new information. And apparently those being questioned have the ability to choose from several options. Except the, quote, question itself is already forced a given, an unrecognized given. Should we, do I, support a completely unregulated economy up so long as we do not take unfair advantage of the poor and the powerless? Important part. Will you still love me when I'm old and fat and ugly? What are you going to say? Yeah, but if you love me, you'd buy me a new car. If you loved your parents the way you should, you wouldn't make me feel this bad. And so on, except don't, God forbid, the gods of the great molecules forbid, that you take this as psychological. It is the movement of information as energy through life's nervous system, through us, as a total organism, as a cellular organism. That these kinds of apparent questions, it's a solicitation for energy to move. And it seems to be that there's a possibility of several channels for this energy to move in. That is, there's several ways in which I could think about this and then respond, either through my thinking of action, that is my speech, or my action. But it is no open-ended question. Are you in favor of an unfettered economy so long as it doesn't take unfair advantage of the poor and the weak? In other words, as long as it does not take unfair advantage of those that the ones asking the questions are going to take advantage of. Are you in favor of the situation of there being the dominant and the submissive? Assuming, of course, that the dominant only dominate those who are submissive and not overdo it. And you think, well, okay, well, I can't find any real fault with that. You're right, you can't. But you don't notice it. What you notice is, well, let me think about that. Now you say, as long as they do not take unfair advantage, that's what I said. Well, wait a minute. Okay, as long as that condition's in there, all right, I'll have to go along with it. You're damn right you will. But you didn't notice it. You don't notice that that is the nature of the information that is transferred within the body of man. There seems to be questions, there seem to be open-ended questions, or there seem to be questions that afford a plurality of views, a plurality of reactions, even if they only be thinking of actions, if they only be verbal, if they only be your own thought processes, there seems to be a plurality of reactions possible. And yet, when people say, as the examples I was making up, that my fictitious person thinks about it and goes, well, all right, I can't disagree with that, they're correct. There was no plurality of possible reactions. They told the truth. Well, I can't disagree. You're right. Or if they say, well, I got to go along with that. You're right. But notice, nobody has any kind of awareness of this. Remember, one of my earlier paragraphs this evening was the intelligence of life. If it was not emblematical, the intelligence of those who would seek To hold on to take control and to keep control is to make those that they're controlling believe that there is a plurality of reactions, thought reactions possible to whatever comes from the source of control, from the government, the dictator, the president, your mother, your father, the priest. As long as you believe that there is a plurality possible, you believe it. There seems to be no doubt. They say take your time, think about it. Think about your action. Do you agree with this or disagree? All right, okay, let me think. Am I taking too much time? The dictator says, no, no. We have all the time in the world. You take your time. This is your choice. We'll leave the room. You think about it. A good slave is a happy slave. Or, as always, a happy slave is a good slave. What's better than being powerless? Being powerless and being happy about it. Who in the hell would want to be dominant? Who wants to be in control? There seems to be plenty of dreams, plenty of movies, plenty of literature throughout the ages that people seem to want to read about. Alexanders, Caesars, Hitlers even. But how many people actually want to be in control? How many coups are going on in this world? You may think there are a lot. You may pick up the paper sometime. You may think, well, Jesus Christ, this is either the 14th or the 27th coup that's taking place south of the Rio Grande this month. But you're wrong. Or even if you were right, if you look down, it wasn't about 3 or 4 people. They just kept, re-cooing each other. There are not that many people who want to be in charge. People seem to want to dream about it. The wiring system seems to be such that people want to read about it, see movies about it. But nobody wants to be in charge. Everybody wants to be the kind of sheep that finds a good shepherd, that finds an acceptable master, that finds the proper place, the proper way in which to be dominated. Now, that's the way it seems psychologically. There is reality behind that. Another aspect, we'll start off from what would appear to be the external world, those that would be apparently trying to take over control, beard power, small p power. They could say, they should say, I'm going to make them say, that to really take and to hold control over people, a group of people, you need to have a working knowledge of their opinions and their prejudices and their attitudes, that it would be indispensable. Because I repeat, the inefficient way is what many of you might think, or many ordinary people think, is armed confrontation between the would-be in control, that is the powerful at the ordinary level, and the powerless. But that is very inefficient. It's always short-lived. It's doomed. It's not going to have much of a life. So if you're going to try and take control and to hold it over any length of time, you don't want it. Soldiers, you got to have as many soldiers as you got people. You got to have one soldier for every person. Then you got to worry about the soldiers. So if you're going to hold control, what you need to operate efficiently is you need to have a real knowledge of their opinions and their attitudes and their prejudices. Now, how many of you can take that internally? How many of you can see that there should be the initial approach of you dealing with your own internal populace would be that you should never ignore, you should never try to shout down, and much less you should never try and convert anybody involved with the partnership. What you need to do is to take up a kind of, or to set up a kind of polling procedure. You should be able to find a cellular, a molecular basis to become Mr. Roper, Mr. Nielsen, Mr. Gallup. And to go through a correct polling procedure, I would point out to you, would entail that the polling procedure and those involved not be antagonistic. You're not going to get where you're trying to start a polling organization to go up to people with your clipboard and say, hey, mother, what do you think about so-and-so? Or, hey, you don't like so-and-so, do you? Now, you know better than that. It's not the way. And yet, how do people deal with themselves? How do people deal with what appears to be the conflicting views within themselves? If you're going to attempt to willfully gain some kind of unordinary control, the most efficient way is not the ordinary way. Such as, all right, I'm going to change, and I'm going to tell everybody I'm going to change, I'm going to make this big old chart, and I'm going to hang it on my kitchen wall, right there on the icebox door. I'm going to hang it on every mirror in the house. I'm going to tell my family, all my friends, including my wife, what I'm going to do. I'm going to make myself do it. I'm going to check myself every 30 minutes. Then every 15 minutes, I'm going to keep a record. I'm going to pay somebody to help watch me. I'm going to go join some organization that teaches this. I'm going to go to some kind of camp. I'm going to do something that will help me do this or make me do this. That is operating on the basis of ignorance. That is operating also on the basis of truly attempting to jump back to an external parallel to set up a kind of concentration camp, to set up a real tyrannical government, and you're going to try and keep some kind of control, some kind of power through armed conflict, through direct antagonistic confrontation. Everybody tries that. That is the way people are wired up. That is the basis of what is referred to as the attempt to change. It is the basis now, one of the hot items, as it's called verbally, is adverse training. Is that it? It's like having people quit smoking every time you reach for a cigarette. They run a hot wire to sensitive parts of your body. That is the kind of conflict that you end up with. Or people saying, I have got to quit some habit because if I don't, Reader's Digest said I'll kill me. Or if I don't, the gods will get me after I die. Or if I don't, nobody will like me. You don't have enough information to start with. That is not the efficient way to take and to hold control. You need more information. You need to know the opinions, the prejudices, the attitudes of those you're attempting to control, and there can be no conditions to it. There can be no people that you refuse to go up and question because they may be offended, or on the contrary, they may offend you, right? They may be insulting. They may say, you can't ask me questions like that. There are parts of me that know some things. There are parts of me that seem to be, from a childhood cultural basis, of certain things that I seem to believe religiously. They're sacrosanct. I wouldn't admit it anymore, but I mean, there's some things I ain't going to look into. Well, you got your choice. If you don't look into them, they're going to look into you. I want to say a few things now about consciousness in general and about emotions. It's been a long time since I said anything specific about consciousness, but I think it's about time to up the stakes a little bit and to give you a new overlay. I want to point out give you another description of what is ordinarily referred to as consciousness, more in line with the way I've been sketching and talking for the last some months. You could look upon consciousness as being a situation wherein there are multiple circuits, multiple systems within the general nervous system of a creature. We're talking about the 3D world here, this planet here and now. But it would be a creature with multiple circuits sufficiently in number and adequately structured so that one of them is able to temporarily dominate another. That is consciousness. It's having a sufficient number in the 3D world of circuits, subsystems, and them being properly, adequately structured in such a way that one of them can temporarily override another one. Now, what this amounts to in practice is the higher one overriding a lower one, a younger one having temporary dominance over an older one. That is consciousness. That is the only 3D reason that people believe that they have some freedom of will. Because, by God, you can do this. You apparently can do this. This is the way it happens. That a person decides that I am going to run 3 miles a day, 5 days a week. We don't have time. We got the time, but we don't have the interest anymore into right now. Where did they get the idea? Where's the source of this new information? Their doctor told them to. They read enough articles saying you're going to die if you sit around and stay a couch potato from the age of 35 to 50. You're going to go like that someday. Something comes into this creature's system, and it says to one and all and itself, I'm going to run 3 miles a day, 5 days a week, and I'm going to start every day at 6:30 in the morning before I go to work. But then there are days that this creature goes out and it runs 2 miles, and it's drizzling and it's kind of cold, and this creature seems to have thoughts of, well, this next corner where I normally going around, this will be a precipitous place. I'll cut it short this morning and I'll go back. And it seems like that the majority of the populace within this creature, under discussion now, gets there to that corner where it normally turns and finishes off that last mile. It gets there and the feet and everything is going to turn. You know, what the hell, one day only do 2 miles, it's raining, it's cold and all that, and it's like as soon as the thought came in, the thought of the action, it's like other thoughts of action throughout the populace went, yay, yay, great idea. But then apparently also from some other source, there seems to be this kind of thought that goes, hey, come on, mother, if you can do 2 miles, you can do 1 more mile. And sure enough, it's as though a large part of the populace was hollering, yeah, 2 miles, that's fine today. And yet you got there at the corner where a few seconds before you were going to stop and going back. Suddenly, it's as though you just go on and you turn and you go on and you run. Only a, quote, conscious being in the 3D world can do that. And what took place just then was one circuit. There was a sufficient number of circuits, and they were structured in such a way that one circuit, one subsystem within that system that seems to be an individual, had the ability to temporarily dominate and override the drives of lower systems, of other systems. That's how you did it. That's how that occurred. And it is absolute fuel. It's not normally analyzed as far as I know in this way. I've never read it. But I can tell you that that passes for a kind of unanalyzed and undigested proof among ordinary people that there is some kind of freedom of will. Because one part of me, I guess unconsciously, or maybe consciously, I was tired and cold and I wanted to just run 2 miles and cut off a mile this morning. And I don't know, I guess unconsciously. I had already decided that, by God, I was going to improve my health and I was going to run 3 miles, and just because it's a little cold, a little cool, hell, I'm a grown person. I'm a big boy, a big girl. And I don't know, my desires just seem to have overcome my lethargy and the temperature, and I just force myself. It's an act of will. Nobody can explain it. They can talk about it and it goes around in circles. That, though, is the basis. That is an operational example of what is called consciousness, is one circuit being able to temporarily dominate another one. I want everybody to file this away. I'm not going much further with it. But everybody uses the terms, including me. I have to. Of differentiating man from something I try to compare him to, albeit as ill-advised, as incomplete as it is to any other creature. But I could point out to you that there are some continuing parallels within the body of life. If we were to say, for instance, that a dog was conscious, which if you'll listen right quick, I could say a dog is conscious, but it's always in a relative manner. A dog would be conscious to a single system creature in the 3D world here, say a worm. Because you'd be talking about, compared to a dog, you'd be talking about a singular system. So in that sense, you could call a dog conscious, but what would be occurring? What you would be referring to, if you were following what I'm saying, the sketching I'm making, is the dog's blue circuit has the ability to temporarily override its red one. I could also point out to you that that is the working reality behind the term domesticated. It's an animal that has sufficient circuits, which a worm doesn't have. It has sufficient circuits, and they're structured in such a way that one of them can override another. That is, a dog can be made, apparently through our influence, can be made to do things in one of his circuits, which I'm calling the blue, just for the sake of making a not perfect comparison between a dog and a man, to say that a dog has traces of red and blue circuits comparable to man, that his blue circuit can override temporarily the red one. He wants to jump up on you with his muddy feet, but in some way you have been able to influence his nervous system to say no. And he will respond to that, and one of his systems will override another one. But you don't call a dog conscious from your viewpoint. You say, well, he only does it because when he was a child, when he was a pup, he'd jump up on me, and I said no once or twice, and I kind of hit him on the nose. And I went, no, no. And so now, if he starts to jump, all I got to do is say no, and by saying he jump, and he'll stop. Is it because the dog has learned that, hey, my feet are muddy, and it gets his clothes muddy? But compared to a worm, compared to a single circuit creature, that is a creature who does not have sufficient circuits, and subsequently, of course, they cannot be arranged in such a manner as to have one override another. But compared to a worm, a dog is conscious. But again, I point out to you, can you call a dog conscious? That he has one circuit that can temporarily override another one, but when does that happen? When you apparently make it happen. So can you call him conscious? If the worm were conscious now and could see the dog, he'd say, hey, compared to me, that dog's conscious. Because that dog can do things that he doesn't want to do. He can refrain from doing things that he wants to do, and I don't have such an ability. So to the worm, the dog is conscious. To you, he's not conscious. He's been domesticated, and I can make him do things that he does not intrinsically want to do. But he's not conscious, right? I'm conscious because I can actually do things I don't want to do. There is nobody somewhere telling me, no, down boy. Right. Righto. You old conscious things, you. You old conscious rascals. I'm so delighted to know each and every one of you. While we're here speaking and using dogs, now I want to get to my wrap-up of this evening to speak about emotions for this year, this decade. I know that all of you wait and wait. I think it's time for me to drag in a new extension of emotion. And I want to do it by asking you this, since it's been many, many moons since I talked about it, and I have kicked, apparently in the 3D sense, I have kicked emotions, I've poked at them and told you that they weren't worth talking about, and what people call emotions are not even worthy of our attention, and forget about it, and etc. Now I want to ask you, you've had all this time, I want to ask you exactly what are human emotions? What are they? Besides all the things that your own mechanical reactions, the sounds that may come out of your own partnership about the source of poetry and romantic love and the arts and building cathedrals and making statues and icons and great literature and warm feelings toward my fellow man and toward worms and dogs. No, 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 no. Get down to it, God damn it. A lot of you now believe, in a sense you can follow me apparently talking in a pretty clinical manner about so-called consciousness and certainly about the human body and exercise and breaking habits, not arguing with oneself, and you can hear what apparently are pretty cold, straightforward observations and notes and detailing about so-called the mind and the brain and the consciousness of man. Now take it down to what I've always been referring to as the blue circuits, that subsection. What are human emotions? Since I was using a dog, let me ask you this. Now I want you to listen. This is not an attack, but I want you to listen and tell me how much different are human emotions from that which, say, a dog is capable of. Now, a dog does not have the yellow circuit, of course, and he cannot write poetry, and he does not write music that we know about, and etc. But if we could arbitrarily isolate human emotion, if we could separate my blue circuit from everything else and look at how it operates, cut out the places where it most severely overlaps and intertwines with the other circuits, but to try and be able to isolate it for some working, temporary definition and defining of what does it do? What is it actually doing in you? How does it manifest itself? What seems to be its purpose? I'm going to ask you, how does it differ from that which a dog is capable of? More specifically, let me point out some of the things that a dog does. I'm just picking out a dog. We could pick out other higher, especially the mammals, of that which would seem to be coming from a dog's blue circuit, if indeed it had one comparable to man, for the sake of our discussion. It pisses to mark off its territory. It growls to threaten off sexual competitors. And it barks and struts to establish its position in the local hormonal hierarchy. Now let's see what else. What more does man's ordinary blue circuit do than that? Specifically, let me make it simply. What are human emotions? What do they do besides now listen, I'm not being funny, and this is not an attack on anybody's past conception of niceness, kindness, religion, decency. I am asking you clinically, through your own experience, not through theories, not through the hardwired beliefs that affect everybody's nervous system of believing that human emotion is this or that. Your own damn experience and your own ability to look at it. What are human emotions besides these three things? As they mark off territory, mates, and position in the hierarchy. Think of everything you can, every manifestation of you personally, anybody else, groups of people. Look at it historically. Look at it instantaneously right now, and what do everything that is called human emotions do besides one of those three? As they mark off, you cannot, of course, stay with this literally to the 3D word limit to this, but what do they do besides mark off, in each individual case, your territory, or for you people in California, space. They mark off territory, mate, sex from every extreme to complete the loop, mate, or position. Call it social position. It is a hormonal place It is your place within the dominant / submissive matrix. What do human emotions do in anybody? How else can you find any example of anything that does not fit into one of those 3 markings? I want to make this a task, but this task, and don't write the task down. This task is to be non-written and non-verbal and non-thinking about. You can't tell yourself. But for the next week, I want you as a task to find me, that is to find you. Don't you tell me and don't you tell yourself. You can't think about it. You can't write it down and you can't say it to you or anybody else. Any exception that you can find by any definition, anything that's ever been called a manifestation of human emotion. You called it that, somebody else called it that, and you accepted it. It sounded reasonably true. If it just sounds vaguely true, that this is a human emotion, say, all right, I'll accept it. Find anyone that does not fit in to it either being a marking off, that is the display of the emotion, the experience of the emotion is not a marking off either of one's territory in the widest literal and figurative sense. It is a marking off and a claiming of the sexual mate, your sexual interest, your sexual territory, or it is the establishment and the acceptance. It is your barking as a dog and strutting. It is the defining and the acceptance of your hormonal place in the hierarchy of everything. You find me an exception to that. You, of course, are not. Oh, sure you might. Don't ruin the task. But the whole thing about being able to do this is I want you to have some conception that people never have, that we're going to begin this process at least, of what are human emotions. And they cannot hide behind Beethoven's 9 symphonies and Mahler's so-called 9 symphonies, nor Shakespeare's writings, or Shakespeare's pseudo-writings, or your belief in humanitarianism, and your belief that you could be a humanitarian if your feet weren't so big. What are human emotions? What are the blue circuit activities of man other than what a dog is capable of marking off the territory, the sexual mate, and the position in the hormonal hierarchy, sometimes known among people as social position, which doesn't tell you anything. One final thing. I talk about this in various ways, but all of you, in conjunction with everything of us meeting and anything else that may be going on, is you should be individually, continually finding ways to at least temporarily affect your own, whatever it is, but your own nervous system programming. And they're available everywhere. I keep talking about it, but those of you who don't do it, if you think it's too simple or too obvious, those of you that listen to music on the radio at various times, just pick out for the next week, just do not turn on the radio. In the car, at home, whenever you turn on the radio, don't turn it on for a week. Just unplug it. Just leave it out. That there is you're surrounded by ways in which your own nervous system is already operating on the basis of what we can just easily refer to as programs. And many of them seem to be innocuous, which is not the point. If it is an unrecognized habit, if it is an attitude, an opinion, a prejudice, which is what a desire to listen to music, as much as I like music, I think I do. I used to. Sometimes I do. God, I hate its noise. It is a form of prejudice. Stop it. Affect it for a week. All of you miss it. You miss it all the way to simple things I've said of always taking out the garbage, always washing your car when you meant to, turning out every light in every room every time you leave the room, picking up every piece of clothing before you drop it down. Whatever you can find and you're surrounded by it, you call it your life. And to you it is things of no consequence. They're small habits that have nothing to do with enlightenment, right? Right. You're blowing it. You're missing it. You're a victim of your own nervous system. This thing is alive. We're in it. And there is not new information coming constantly. Your socks do not holler, hey, if you'll pick me up every time you throw them down, I'll help you extend your nervous system into unactivated areas. The lights do not holler from the bathroom, hey, if you'll turn me off when you leave, I'll tell you a secret. Where's it going to come from? Where's the information come from? It sounds as though I preach to you at times. And I holler and I get insulting. I try to be tricky. I try to make jokes. The ultimate information has got to apparently begin to flow through you. But if you're deaf to light bulbs, if you're blind to socks, if you're unthinking about turn on the radio and it's always there, you're cutting down on the possibilities. You're cutting down on the time element of what even 3D time is left, that you can begin to apparently be the source, to be at least the conduit of your own new information. And as I consider the possibility now of concluding this,